Greetings! You're watching SeptumSin versus the world. And of course, here we go on another journey. A journey through the entertainment field. A field of mines and explosions, of censorship, and plenty of scissors as they try to cut out every little thing we say. Here we are in the Volgcast. So I thought I would do this a little bit different. We've just been kind of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of conversational thing. And I think about conversation starters. And for me, there was one that almost made the grade, which was when the Angry Video Game Nerd, or James Rolfe, had done a thing about how Blu-rays are not so good. And everybody was overreacting to it and commenting on it and all this. And I'm just like, dude, don't take it that seriously. He's selling the Blu-ray of his series at the end of this. The thing that did come a follow-up was something that was posted by a YouTuber by the name of Bob Samurai. Some anime fans who are on YouTube would know him because he's a fairly well-known anime YouTuber. And he went on about collecting and the thought of, like, do we really collect? Or when does that collecting come close to hoarding? Or is collecting physical media worth it at all when you've got all the stuff that's available for streaming? He made a lot of interesting points in his video, and I said I would bring that up because I think most people here have at least a healthy physical media collection. Yeah, one sort or another. And I mean, I wouldn't even know physical media if I saw it. It would sneak up on me. But it is an interesting topic. Is physical media versus, like, hoarding versus collecting versus having a collection that means something, or even collecting versus just streaming because of the current age. These are just it's just an interesting topic, and I asked if you ought to all take a look at those two videos. The first one, I just thought the video, I mean, James Rolfe's one was more tongue-in-cheek than anything else. I'm not even sure to take that seriously.
Yeah, it was very much his reasoning why he doesn't like it, and honestly, a good third of his reasons were simply because he's still using a PlayStation 3 to watch fucking Blu-ray.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, he's like an old-fashioned guy.
He admits
like
that in the video, though, too. Like,
exactly.
He showed a love for DVD in it. He actually showed his love for DVD throughout it.
And I can see his points on some of the stuff. There are times where it's like, damn, they couldn't have like thrown some shit on that Blu-ray there. That looks like a fucking something I'd buy at a Korean bootleg market or something.
And I'll admit, I was a hard sell on Blu-ray at first. I really liked DVD, and I didn't see much point in changing over. But one of the main reasons I did so completely, and I really do prefer Blu-ray now, the main reason is space. They make things in smaller cases. If they made DVDs in smaller cases, I wouldn't care half the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he touched on the collector's edition shit too, but that's a problem in any format, dude.
And I do like collector's editions, so that kind
they're
of
fine. But sometimes you get that. I loved when he was trying to put the fucking Godzilla one on the shelf because that's exactly what was going through my mind. Like, what the hell? I thought this was like steelbook sized, not
right
fucking
now,
children's
I've got
book.
it just kind of nestled between.
Well, they were trying to do a Godzilla pop-up book, but
that's all you can do with it is shove it somewhere, you know.
Right. But it's cool looking.
It is, you know, but it's that I can understand. But again, that's a problem with DVD. I have collector's edition DVDs where it's like, well, that's a stupid shape.
VHS had collector's editions like that as well.
Yeah.
And they were big because if you got like a whole series on VHS, oh my gosh.
Hey, the original.
Right. Like the point of those is to display them, really. You know?
Yeah.
Now, I will admit, and this may be heresy to be saying this as co-host of a physical media channel, I do, as an environmentalist, I do have issues with the creation of physical media. But there are workarounds in my mind. I am conflicted about it. But one of the biggest things is we've been having this discussion about potentials for censorship and that sort of thing. And also, Septum brings up a good point in a conversation we had earlier tonight of like videos that are lost to us forever. Oh, but you sometimes will find it in someone's collection. Oh, yeah. So it's like there are very solid, yes, there are very solid arguments for collectors, especially because when you get into geeks like us that really like our stuff like Tunbridge, or like one of the things I watched this week was the Gamers, the Shadow Menace. You get stuff like that you don't find at Walmart. It's kind of nice to have a home for them somewhere. And it sort of is a guard against, if everyone's like, well, you can stream everything. Based on what I've heard, I don't trust that I'm purchasing a download.
No.
It's kind of,
I don't trust streaming any further than I can throw it.
Well, and with the downloads, you're renting that shit, bro. Like, if they ever decide to get rid of that service, you're fucked.
Exactly.
Because, see, this is something being involved with the retro gaming shit and just gaming in general. Also, I hear a lot of this over there where it's like, why not just emulate or buy only digital? And there's always good arguments for both, Like, I, as a lover of physical media, could sit here and still make a convincing argument to why it's pointless, But you don't need it. You can steal anything you fucking want on the internet, and you can go get a lot of it for like digitally, temporarily get your fix and move on. It all depends on what your preferences are at the end of the day, and whether you care about the stuff that you guys are mentioning. And a lot of us do, like being able to preserve something in case it's not available all of a sudden somewhere else, or all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And
I admit that I do a little bit of both. I do both hoarding and collecting. But that being
said, I think we're both in that boat, bud. We're not as we don't do quite the legwork that say Brandon and Jake do to narrow down like what's worth buying and what's worth just fucking leaving.
I've got an example
and it's like, well, I got the money and it's cheap, I'll fucking take it. I'm definitely guilty of that.
Our pickup video flies in the face of that because, for instance, I picked up dick figures for just because I thought it looked interesting.
Well, with a title like that, you gotta go.
Yeah,
let's just be real.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of half and half. Where, like, generally speaking, I want to get things that mean something to me. That are important to me. Also, I'll do that, but I'll also find things that I wanted to see that I'm able to find for cheap, and especially like if it's something that has a slipcover, I'll and like something that you don't normally find with one, I'll and it's cheap enough, I'll go for it. I mean, I do a lot of blind buying, but whenever I do that, it's always kind of an educated guess, and it's usually because the price point is acceptable. Yeah.
I have to have at least normally heard of it or have some desire to see it at some point. There are times I buy just dumb shit because it's dumb, but
and the cost should not be too the cost shouldn't be too great, in order for that to make sense. I think it's kind of a combination for me. I mean, I do feel like in the old days that I used to collect just kind of for its own sake because I didn't really have much in the ways of hobbies, which was my own fault. But then I had to sell so much of my collection, and that hurt a lot. So then when I got it back, I was kind of doing the mantra was always, get the things back that I cared about, but get them back in a better form than I had them before. and then also just new things, different things, things that were in a form that we're not that you're not used to seeing them in on YouTube. So like for a lot of things that I'm able to find, like especially if I'm able to find them cheaply, the resources I've tended to use have been eBay sellers that tend to sell Canadian Blu-rays that are also Region A, but they are cheaper than American ones, and which for me it's not as big a deal because I have a region-free player, but still it's such that I'll find ways to do that, and oftentimes the Canadian ones, they'll have unique slip covers, they'll have unique covers in general, they'll just have things about them that make them special, and so that automatically makes them stand out, and the price factor is usually more advantageous that way. And so therefore it's like you're able to stock up on a lot of movies that like, especially like there's a seller that I use all the time, JDC Outlet on eBay. He sells Canadian Blu-rays, but he lives in southern Alberta, and he has a shipping address that goes out of Sweetgrass, Montana, and so the shipping cost is significantly less for American buyers, which I guess is where he gets a lot of his business. And then with someone who buys in bulk like me, he'll refund my shipping, which is really nice of him. So then what you're able to do is you're able to find a lot of those movies that are good, but for whatever reason, they're not really valuable anymore. So like a good example is something like, 50/50 or Bridesmaids, or, something that's maybe from an earlier Blu-ray release, that something that is a good movie, but just for whatever reason, it's not really a special edition. It's very common to find, there's nothing really about that particular film that is all that collectible. And, for whatever reason, it doesn't cost all that much. So therefore, it's something that, when you're purchasing it, you can find a much better, the cost factor makes a lot more sense. So, I find that eBay is a good way to do that. Amazon, if you have certain local used media sellers like Second and Charles, they can be good. If you find certain eBay sellers that you like, that will play ball with you, then that can be good. That can be good too. And then I think that, especially if you're looking for new things, I think finding something on like Amazon.ca, which is the Canadian Amazon store, like you will be able to find things for cheaper there than you could oftentimes on the American Amazon store, even factoring in the fact that shipping from Canada to the US tends to be pricier, especially like if you have Amazon Prime in the US like I do. But that even factoring that in, sometimes like if you get several new things from Amazon.ca, you get several new things and they are able to ship them together, then even though the shipping cost is more because of the exchange rates, and the exchange rates are more favorable for Americans, and so therefore, even with that being said, it's still a lower price overall, because I've run the numbers, and they've come out to being cheaper that way than they would be otherwise. So part of it is just, if you know how to find the lowest price, then collecting is not such a big burden on your pocketbook as it would be if you were to get every single thing new.
For sure.
I mean, I'd say most of what I own, I've gotten used. Usually for a really good deal.
Right. Like the only time I'm going to spring for new price is if it's some like these Criterions or like some fancier set of something that I want to make sure that I fucking get it like minty. Then I'm going new. For
me, it's that. But it's also like if it's a Best Buy exclusive, thing, or if it's something that I think is going to sell out really fast that you probably won't be able to buy again later at a lower price.
Yeah, if you want it like right away and not to get gouged on it later too, that's probably a good idea.
Like that Gamera set.
Criterion is an interesting example because one, they are really, really, really good at keeping things in print at least for a while. They do sometimes let things slide, but they're usually really good about keeping them for a while. And then the other thing is they do those periodic sales where, a couple months a year, they will be half price. And that's a lot better than full price.
Barnes and Noble is really good about that too. Barnes and Noble, they'll usually Barnes and Noble, they'll do see, because normally I would never dream of getting something from Barnes and Noble because they tend to price gouge like mad, except for when they do their Criterion sales, because they'll do 50% off, and then if you have a card, a membership card, then you'll get an extra 10% off. So that's like 60% off, and that can usually even beat what you might find on Amazon.
I typically pay about $18 for a Blu-ray, something like that.
I never thought of Barnes and Noble as a spot. I bought a lot of books, a lot of true crime books, a lot of Calvin and Hobbes, shit like that from Barnes and Noble. But I never thought to get movies there. The only one I've ever bought is Grave of the Fireflies for like $7.
That's another good example because these sets are so cool.
I know they're really cool, but like Barnes and Noble, like that's the only time.
On that one, but still,
July and November is usually when they do their sales, at least on our side of the world. I did want to bring in a point, and I think these do come to the point that Bob Samurai made in his video. And he had said that there's only two types of collectors, which I do think is simplifying quite a bit. But that there are those people who just buy up anything and everything in sight, and then there are those people who only want those things that have value to them, either financial value or intrinsic value.
I'm glad that you got this back.
Those are two very different things right there.
One of the latter, the finding things of value. It has to, in his mind, be financially worth something to him in the end.
Yep, and this is a problem you see in all type of collecting, where it seems to start when people start thinking of it as money they've wasted on crap, and then you see them turn around and become the essential collector, and that's why he's simplified it so much, is because those are the two types of collectors he's been. Not to talk shit on the guy. I mean, I've been in the same position, I guess, sort of, and seen many friends deal with it.
Well, but you're right.
If you start thinking about the money you're throwing at it as wasting money, then okay, by that logic, by some stretch of that logic, we're all just fucking wasting money, bro. You don't need to pay for any of this stuff, really.
You could say that about any hobby or any
type of recreational thing you sink money into. You don't have to do it, so I guess we're all just throwing money away,
but at the same time, like if you were to do it to where you only ever spent money on bare essentials, then you'd have no hobbies, and that would negatively impact your emotion. That would negatively impact your emotional health.
I would also say that like anyone that collects strictly from the viewpoint of how valuable is it, or how valuable could it be, or whatever, or on the flip side of the coin, the people that buy anything and everything just to buy, just to have, just to get, those two groups could easily be described as hoarders. But I think anyone in between, the description falters, because like if you're someone who's collecting because you genuinely are getting appreciation for it as you go, then that's a whole lot different than just buying it to let it sit on the shelf until you're ready to sell it.
Yeah, I mean that's where the problem of monetary collectors comes into any hobby. They tried and failed it with comic books. They've tried and failed it with video games. It's action figures. It only can go so far, and then eventually the fucking bottom starts falling out. No one fucking wants Little Samson for $1,000. The only assholes that are like hipster collectors that get in. So you might see
or like
that
that one person that's put up the 2 volumes of Katanagatari for months now, and they're asking $1,500 for the 2 volumes.
Oh man.
Yeah, get fucked, bud. No one's buying that shit.
It's ridiculous. I mean, you already brought up the big example, which was the comic books. I mean, because that just wrecked that industry. But I honestly, out of the two, at least on YouTube, I can't say the same for any other platforms or just in real life. But out of the two, I tend to see on YouTube, whenever I watch other people's collection videos, I tend to see people that will just buy whatever for seemingly no real reason, or no, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of clear rationale behind why this thing versus another thing. And generally speaking, it tends to be the most standard, most readily accessible version of something that you could possibly find at your nearest Walmart or something. And so you'll just get a lot of the same shit over and over again that, you know, it may be good, it may be bad, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's all the same standard stuff that you could find like pretty much anywhere. And there's nothing really about it that's too unique. And that's more what gets under my skin, because the things that I collect them because, well, I like them, or because I want to see this thing that I don't necessarily trust to be able to find on streaming. And, you know, generally speaking, it's an educated guess to where, like, more than likely I will like it. And even if I don't, then I wouldn't have paid all that much to where I couldn't, you know, just turn it into trade-in credit or sell it on Facebook Marketplace or something. You know, so I never really feel too many qualms about it, because I'm not going to blow a lot of money on something that I don't think I'm going to like. But for me, I always try to, and I hope that people watching my videos, I hope that they see this when they look at the background, you know, see some of the titles on the shelf. I always try not only to have hopefully unique titles on the shelf, but also unique editions of things that you don't normally see on other people's collection videos. And yeah, that's important to me, because I hate just saying the same shit over and over and over again. And even before I had the current channel, when I was just uploading, you know, just I would like a complete collection ago, but I deleted it, and it was like severely anyway. But at that time, you know, I would get comments from people that stumbled upon it, and they complimented the fact that my collection was really eclectic. And you know, I think that that stood out to me, because I really don't like how, generally speaking, on YouTube, you'll see the same kinds of people over and over again. You'll see people that only collect like the most mainstream things in the most standard editions, and that's pretty much all they'll collect. Or you get people that like only collect horror, and that's it pretty much. Or you'll get people that, you know, like they'll get like a select few people that are like, I'm thinking of like Logan Toxic on YouTube, who will get, they obviously have a region free player, so they'll get versions of things that are not USA. You know, they'll get stuff from all over the world, and it's like, well, that's nice. You know, I like seeing variety. And like, he in particular has a very eclectic collection, so like there's a lot of horror, but then there's a lot of Criterions, and there's a lot of Arrow, and there's a lot of, you know, all every kind of thing that you could want. So like, that's more what I have tried to achieve with my collection. And you know, especially if it is something that you're used to seeing, if I can find it in an edition that is different from what most people are used to seeing, then I think that's a good thing. And that's, again, that's where the Canadian editions of things, that's where they can come in handy, because you get to see the French on the underneath the English title, and you know, just kind of jazzes it up a little bit.
It does kind of annoy me personally, though, the way that they run. Like they'll do like the English and then flip the French like flipped underneath. And to me, that it just looks a little wonky, I think. But yeah,
It is weird.
It is, but I think the reason why they do that is because, and I could be wrong about this. It also depends on the release because some of them don't do this, but by and large, you're right. And I think part of the reason why is because I think in Europe for non-English languages, so like you don't see this generally with UK stuff, but like for some non-English languages, like I know for sure Spain is this way, Italy is this way, that the orientation of the text will be opposite of what we're used to seeing. So you have to kind of read up as opposed to read down when you read the title. And so I think because Canada, because they have two official languages on the federal level, English and French, they do the English the way that you're used to seeing it, oriented that way. And then you'll see the French kind of crawling up. And I think that is meant to emulate how French titles
English
are.
is arguably the main spoken language in all of Canada, so it's like the English is that way. So then the French speakers now they just have to flip it around. It's like
Well, but I think that they're just if you get a French Blu-ray, then it probably is arranged that way as well. And so then if you're dealing with Quebec or whatever, because it's kind of a mini France in a way, then they tend to culturally take after that
for real once.
Yeah, but they tend to take after French everything, culture, literature, everything. So it kind of follows that model a little bit more. But I think that's why. But not always, because like, for example, Warner Brothers Blu-rays that are Canadian, the ones that I've had, they have the English and the French have been oriented the same way. So I think it does kind of depend on who's putting it out, or like you'll get certain movies that if they have a slip cover, then you'll see the English on one side of the slip on the spine. You'll see the English on one side, and on the other side, you'll see the French. So like, for example, if you were a primarily French speaker, you could, if you wanted, you could orient the movie the other way to where the French was more prominent. And then also, like a lot of Canadian ones, you'll see reversible covers to where, again, if you were a predominantly French speaker, you could flip it around, which I think is really cool. I think that's really cool. It kind of gives it some added value, some zest on the inside.
Now, you hit on a pretty interesting point a little bit earlier about sometimes just collecting to collect and all these standard editions and so on. Now, one of the I follow a lot of collectors online. One of my favorite ones, a Wet Movie One, is one that has the example of someone who has actually been working towards thinning his collection and has a lot of. And one of the things to check out some of the more recent videos in his channel, when he came upon more hard times financially, he started looking at his collection and realizing, wait, I've got like 3 copies of this. I've got like 4 copies of this.
Right.
And sometimes that's that thing. It's like, well, I really like that. I should grab it. Do I have it in my collection? I'm not sure. But again, and I think it's really cool to see that. Looking at that and having that retrospect, that whole Marie Kondo type ideas, like taking an item. And I'm just picking this up because it's convenient.
I doubt you have 3 copies of that, though.
No, that would be too expensive. So taking this, like, say, does this have some value to me? Not necessarily financial value, though there is some fun in having that, but say, is this something I'm going to want to watch again? And there is an admirable quality to having a collection like that. I know myself as a collector, I would not mind taking my collection and purging it of everything that I don't really want to watch again. But there are a lot of different mini things. Like, I want to collect every Oscar-winning film. That's a goal of mine. But I can't collect every Oscar-winning film and keep to the will I ever want to watch it again type thing, because there are some Oscar-winning films that I will never want to watch again
Or see, like I tried to do the Oscar nominees, and Lord knows I don't think I want to watch Norbit again if I can help it. But it's there.
Right. You know, I think the way to avoid talking yourself into the corner of I should sell off most of my shit because I wasted money on it or some insane thing like that is to just look at your collection in two different ways. You've got your archive of movies that are important to you, and then you've got the collection as a whole. You know, do you really want it in there? Is it worth having as a conversation piece? You know, like, as you know, Brandon, I fucking hated Automaton Transfusion, but I'm not getting rid of that anytime soon, because if anybody ever just was like, says, show me a movie that I will fucking hate, I'm going to give them that one. And I'm going to let them torture themselves with it the same way that I did. It's, you know, it's a fun conversation piece. I'm definitely guilty of the hoarding a little bit. You know, anybody who watches me on YouTube, like Brandon, knows that by and large, my Walmart purchases are multi-packs and, you know, complete box sets of shows. That's kind of what
there's nothing wrong with a good multi-pack. When you're a collector, space is always an issue. And for me, certain things, like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, I used to not be a fan of the multi-packs, but they do save space.
This is a really cool box set for a series. But this series is not much different episodically wise, as like probably number of episodes is probably something like this.
Right.
You know, where you've got a ton of space, but it's a really cool looking set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you have to judge aesthetics relative to space, because like a good example is like let's say you know, trying to think. So sorry. I'm trying to get a sense of, say, the standard edition of something, or something that you know, does not come in any kind of special version, and then that versus, say, a multi-pack of something, you know, that can often save you space. But then if the box set of something comes with something really cool, then, you know,
there's always
go for that
wiggle room for that stuff. Like,
here's I'm trying to dig up some illustrations here of an example of sometimes you can have different editions.
Dude, the worst example in my entire collection of space not saved, like what Brandon just showed, is my Stargate SG-1 collection. Like, the first half is all those slim pack seasons, and then the second half is all the slim pack seasons, and the first half is all those big, like, fucking 5 or 6 DVD sets. You know, so they're like they're like that thick, each of them, each season. So Stargate takes up an entire shelf of my fucking collection, bro.
I used to
just
have
for SG-1, not even the other shows. What?
I used to have this in all the individuals, which are like 3 to 4 episodes a piece. This itself, the series itself, now I slimmed it down, as you can see. These are season sets. But at 3 to 4 episodes a piece, this took up, and Jake had seen it at one time. I ended up giving it as a gift to a friend of ours. And that set took up an entire shelf.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just it's cool to look at, but gosh.
We were talking before about those Canadian releases. I have this really nice, slim Canadian release Star Wars that I bought on eBay that I never got around to opening, and I'm going to end up selling it on eBay along with these two, you know, pieces of crap. Because I got the really awesome looking art box that had all 6 of the first movies. It's going to take about the same amount of space, maybe a little bit less, but it looks so much cooler.
It's cooler, yeah. I mean, you know, and that's a good example of times when it's worth like having 2 or upgrading, you know.
But here, this is a recent one. I've had Haganai for a while. I recently upgraded to this one for the sequel. I had this, and you see this, the upgrade takes up more space, but it looks so much cooler, and it matches the original series, you know. So it's like,
you know,
And so I'm going to sell this on eBay. And so it's like, okay, that's
cool. And see, the important part of that, though, is not expecting to get back every penny you paid for it. It seems like that's the corner this Bob Samurai guy talked him into, of thinking that, like, it's not worth buying the stuff because you're not going to get your investment back or something. It's like, dude, it's stuff that you bought for a hobby. It's not. You're not buying and trading stocks. I noticed in the video he talked about how he made a bunch of money on Canadian weed. I thought that was pretty fucking awesome. But you know, that's an investment opportunity, man. Anime, come on. That's you're not.
Well, yeah, or like for aesthetics, we've got this one here, the art box here for Senran Kagura, which this week is getting an essentials release, and it's already had a save release. Now these save editions, I hate that green stripe. I think it's
I do too, but there's
and when you look at it, when you look at it on the shelf, it loses all individuality. It loses all interest. The essentials one is basically you just have a little gray stripe across the top. It looks better, but the old school looks
like
even.
What is it, like greatest PlayStation games? You know, you have to separate them to the side and make their own section for your collection just because they look so dumb peppered in there. You know.
Yeah, they have that kind of old school green, that green puke look too, as well.
Yeah, green puke look. That's a good way to put it.
Just as a question
back
to
the hoarding element, though, like I'm definitely guilty of doing a bit of hoarding. But again, if you follow how I collect, it tends to be like lately, you know, like fun stuff or shit that I'm just not going to find at the thrift store from the internet, you know. And then I do my multi-packs and my complete series shit at Walmart every so often, usually once a month. But like thrift stores is where I buy stupid shit that, you know, I probably don't really need. But
when Movie Stop was a thing, and they're awesome. I went through a phase where if I could find a complete anime series at Movie Stop used, I would probably get it.
Well, they have 50% off.
Yes, but it was probably really cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And half the time I had no idea what the show was, but I was like, I'll bet you it's out of print or will be.
See, my whole thing with buying used DVDs is pretty much this. Like, if it's a horror movie, I'm almost certainly going to buy it, especially if it's like $1 or $1.50. It's coming home. It's either going to be like shitty and I just get rid of it, or I think I talked about it in one of those swoop videos. Brandon probably saw it. It's like, if I don't really like it, I'll probably just tuck it in a box for someone or something, you know. But for $1.50, like, what do you have to fucking lose at that point? Or especially for $1, like, good Christ, just buy it.
Like a lot of my library pickups. I mean, when I buy stuff from the library, it does not cost much.
Right. I mean, my whole thing on it with the used movies is if it's intriguing enough that the title catches my eye and I pick it up, I'm probably going to buy it. But if then after that, like the cover intrigues me enough that I flip it over and read the little blurb on the back, then I'm definitely taking it home, most likely, because it's like at least interesting enough for that, and that's worth the $1 fucking cover price to get into the movie, you know.
Oftentimes when I'm out hunting, biggest thing when I'm in the used stores is when I come across things that I don't have. I like. What I do is I take and put them in a pile, and then I decide.
Your maybe pile.
My maybe pile.
And then you whittle it down to a for sure fucking coming home pile.
Right. And then you're put on hold pile, and then you're definitely put back pile.
Oh, dude, the gals at the thrift stores here know. Like when I rock up in there, I am taking up at least half of the counter space because I'm gonna make like 4 stacks of movies right there, and then I'm gonna come up and sort them to the side, and you know, decide what I want. And then usually they're super cool about that because I also organize the movies at the thrift store. You'd be surprised how much of a discount you'll get if you just line up their shit real quick while you're sorting through it. So little pro tip there, kids.
So I had a question for y'all on this. Now, this is something that is a harder thing for me as a collector. Whenever I feel like it's a compulsion in a way. Whenever I've got like into a series, I wanted to give an example of one because it's the one that comes out the most. Actually, let me get the original one. There we go.
Yeah.
Evil Bong. Now, really and truly, if I was to say this in fact, this is really all that was good about the series at the end of it all. But I really feel the need whenever people just keep putting out movies in a series that I want to collect all of them.
Yep.
And that, I don't know if anybody else feels like that, but if there's like sequels, and I don't mean like Disney sequels, like where it was direct to DVD type thing, like Bambi 2 and stuff, but like these are like straight out sequels that are kind of canon sequels to the series. Now, Evil Bong, I have a love-hate relationship with the sequels, but
I guess it depends upon whether I liked the first film or not. Like, if it's something like Legally Blonde 1 or 2, sorry, Dave, I know you pick those up, but
let's be honest here. Mostly especially with horror, I don't know that there's a perfect horror franchise. There just isn't, dude.
Well,
Like
there
most of them, if they go beyond 3 movies, tend to, even a lot of trilogies have the shit sequel, you know. If they go beyond 3 though, and they're still like good after those, then you're lucky, you know, and it's gonna be hit and miss. Like every horror franchise I ever grew up on had that shit. But I've ended up buying all of them, you know, and I'm going to continue to do it. I'm still looking for the Children of the Corn movies, even though half of those are fucking dog shit. You know?
How many films actually do have sequels too? You know?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you never think of the Stepford Wives as having sequels, but it had like 3 or 4 sequels. That 2 of them have not made it to DVD or
dude, man, there's like hidden franchises in horror out there. I forget the name of it, but I recently found out about like this insane Mexican werewolf franchise that's went on for like 20 years or some shit, and it starred the same dude and I think a lot of the fucking movies. But we only got like 2 or 3 of them released, so as if they were like unrelated.
You're talking
That bothers me.
Which, you know, it's funny. Speaking of that, and speaking of James Rolfe, which we started off with, he did a video recently about forgotten franchises. You know, about continuous movie series that ran for a long, long time that aren't necessarily running anymore. And they were huge in their day, but people don't really talk about them anymore. And so that's a pretty interesting video to check out. Now, as far as collecting sequels and things, I think, part of it is it depends on your love of the particular franchise. Part of it is the availability of the sequels, because like David said, certain things have sequels that people don't even really know about because they're not that widely distributed. Like a good example is actually The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. It did have a TV movie sequel years later, but not a lot of people know about it, and it's not all that readily available. And then other films in a series, you know, they are very readily available.
Yeah. Another one that comes right to mind is The Gate. A lot of people don't know that there's The Gate too.
Well, but
then we were talking about and also to tie it back in, we were talking about having multiple versions of things. I generally, if I can help it, I try not to. I try to like if I had something on DVD and it got a Blu-ray release, I would sell the DVD.
Or pack it to a friend like I did with Dave, you know. I mean, it's like just get rid of it because why, you know?
Well,
the only thing I'm guilty of doing that with is VHS.
I did that recently where I actually sent off a little UK care package to a friend because they were movies that I was getting like the 4Ks of them. Yeah, like I'd pre-ordered them, so I didn't really need them anymore, and I wanted to do something nice.
Hook up a friend with those movies. It's always a good.
Exactly.
Exactly. But with VHS, dude, I'll pick it up because especially VHS is so cheap to collect for the most part. So it's like
they are, and they're kind of big.
Every single version of RoboCop and the Terminator that have ever been released. I even have like the behind the scenes tape,
and they're big.
The Terminator on VHS, you know.
They're big. They, especially the big boxes, like they're big. They're flashy. They have a certain collector's appeal. DVDs, for the most part, they don't really have that same magic. Even Blu-rays, like, because they've been around for a while now, you know, you can find a lot of them for pretty cheap if you know where to look.
Well, and I
but
might
yeah,
be the only
I'm
person
always
in this group too that would argue for the dirtiness of a VHS tape when you're watching certain things. You know,
well,
like
I
there's
wouldn't
just
I wouldn't necessarily say that. Just well, maybe in this group, but like in general, I think that VHS does have a
no,
pretty
yeah.
dedicated
In
fan
general, no.
base,
There's
and I
tons of
mean,
us out there, little
yeah,
filth
well,
that
and I
like a
mean
fucking good old dirty VHS fucking tape of like the DVD. Because there's certain stuff, dude, that I'm just so used to seeing it on VHS that's just the way that I pull it out to watch it, even though I have it on DVD. I think didn't you get Razorback recently, or was that Dustin? That movie
wasn't
fucking
me. Although
shreds, man.
I actually did. What's funny is I looked up Razorback on IMDb recently because not because I had heard about Dustin or anybody else having gotten it, because the word Razorback had for whatever reason floated through my mind, and I looked it up on IMDb to see if a movie had already been called that, or like if it was essentially up for grabs. And there was that Razorback Australian horror film, and I was like, okay, I think that probably has been done already. But still, but then I found the Blu-ray of it, like the Australian Blu-ray of it, and I put it in my horror, my animal exploitation Amazon wish list so I could keep track of it. But
for sure, get that one, dude. You will love it. It's fucking amazing. It's like you remember the dingo ate my baby. Fucking,
yeah.
that story. That's kind of like part of the genesis of Razor. It's like if you mixed it, you know, if you just took awesome Mad Max, like even dude, Razorback's probably one of the best movies that showcases the outback in a beautiful way. I think there's like that's a big part of why I love the movie is just all the scenes of just the outback looking creepy and desolate as fuck. They top Mad Max or anything else I've ever seen in that regard. And then it's basically Jaws with a giant pig that's also somewhat based on a true story of a lady that claimed a dingo ate her baby, and then it turned out that one did, you know.
Actually,
speaking of not double dipping, like I actually in my latest video that I posted a few minutes ago, I talked about how I had the Exorcist anthology, but I had the Scream Factory of Exorcist 3 already. I ordered the Scream Factory of Exorcist 2, and then also the 3-disc edition of Exorcist 1. And so, and the Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion prequel to the Exorcist, those ones. Exorcist the Beginning, that one did have a standalone Blu-ray release, but it is very hard to come by now. And then Dominion prequel to
got
the
that
Exorcist,
one at my Dollar Tree haul recently, and that's $1 about what you should pay for
on
beginning,
Blu-ray or on DVD.
It's just DVD.
Because the Blu-ray, it did get a standalone release, but it's very hard to find. And then also Dominion prequel to The Exorcist, that one never got a standalone Blu-ray release. And so what I did was I found some covers on custommaniacs.com, and I was able to print them out on nice paper. I printed out the covers for Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion prequel to The Exorcist. I put them in their own cases, took those discs, put them in there, and then I had printed out the separate artwork for the other 3, and I was able to sell them so that way the other 2 movies, they could be standalones, and that way I had the best editions of the other 3, and, you know, that way it just... and I did that... not exactly
really
that same way,
matters.
but I did
Exorcist
that with
3 is probably the more I've ruminated on it. I think the third one is my favorite. The first one's quite historic, but goddamn, it's in terms of like random horror sequels. Exorcist 3 kills. Incidentally, I do have a review. Good. Shameless motherfucker plug. Get over to Drunken Master Studios. Check out my Exorcist
already.
I'm really excited for when Exorcist 2 comes in the mail, because that one, the Scream Factory, has like I think 3 different cuts of the film, and so
underrated.
That'll be Well, that'll be pretty interesting because I've only ever seen the one that came on the Exorcist anthology before there was a Scream Factory of it.
I mean,
And
I'm
so
not
I'm
saying
curious.
any cut of Exorcist 2 is going to make it as good as the other two movies, but
Well,
it's still, I think it's
actually,
unfairly maligned. People went in there and didn't really appreciate it for what it was, which I get it. You know, as a sequel to something like The Exorcist, it would have pissed me off too. I had the benefit of
yeah.
like going back to this shit or going to it for the first time, well removed from like being a kid and seeing The Exorcist and thinking it was amazing. So,
Well, and that's where I was coming from because I knew all the hate against it. And now, granted, if I were part of that original audience and I adored the first one, and then a sequel comes out, I'd have been pissed off too. But then, just
as
trying
a
to
sequel to
appreciate
The
it.
Exorcist, it blows, but as a movie, it's pretty
Yeah.
damn good. You know.
Yeah, I appreciated it for what it was and what it was trying to go for, but that's why I'm curious, like what the other cuts have to offer. But
I'd be down
then
to watch
that
that,
way I had all 5 movies and I didn't double dip, and it just, I was thinking was like, oh, then I'd have these redundant discs that I could sell and get trade-in credit or whatever, which I did. But I did that with like Child's Play. Like I had the big Chucky 7 movie collection, but I knew that I always wanted to get the Scream Factory of the first one, and so and if I were to do that, then I would have double dipped or whatever. So then I traded that in. I got the Scream Factory of Child's Play, and then I got the other one separately.
I have like 3 different Child's Play sets. I got to get the fuck rid of a couple of those.
So, I think that makes a point, though, when you're talking about standard versus there. First off, I think standard editions do have a place in your collection, especially if it's a movie that you have like somewhat of an interest. You want it in the collection, but it's not like your favorite film or it's not one of the big ones. Like a good example for me, I've got this standard edition of Beyond the Door. I like the film well enough, but it's not one that's like one of my favorites. Now, one that's a really big one for me would be this big edition here, because that was a big one for me growing up. And, it opens up, and you can hear it still kind of needs a new battery, but still, it's got a lot of special features. Or one I would love to upgrade if they ever do is if Beverly Hills Chihuahua were to get a super Criterion 15-disc release.
I'm down for a Criterion release of that. Let's get a petition going.
But that's the idea.
Well, that was like the Criterion, didn't they do? They did that April Fool's thing where they did. They said that one of the titles would be Kindergarten Cop, and then they did another April Fool's where I guess it was going to be Chud. That was going to be one of them.
Chud deserves one, dude.
Chud should get one.
Chud is so amazing.
What's funny about that though is that every now and again the Criterion will pull a kind of a strange choice, but like a refreshingly strange choice. Like they put out like Repo.
It seems. I mean,
they put out like Repo Man. They put out the Blob. They put out Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Just these more like kind of out of left field choices.
Me hyped on it, but definitely Criterion. Like Lone Wolf and Cub is, in looking at the grand scheme of things with Criterion, it's sort of weird that like the Kurosawa stuff I can understand, but Lone Wolf and Cub is pretty fucking filthy and bloody. It's, I don't know, like having bought a lot of samurai movies through Criterion lately, it's an odd duck.
Now, actually, I could almost see if one day people start talking about John O'Brien, I could see them putting this out because they like to do early films from people that that would be really kind of cool. But
I don't know if I'd sell this one though in general because it's such a, I don't know, there's a feel sometimes, even if now that's the thing though, it is all about how much do you care about it. Like me, I really feel that obligation to get all the Star Wars films on.
I was happy to pay premium prices for these.
Signed too.
Yeah, that one's signed.
Mm-hmm.
But this one I put off for the longest time, but then I was like, I got to do it.
Well,
I got to support them.
Yeah, stuff like that where it's like indie
Yeah.
filmmakers or
Yeah.
any web. I'd love to have. Don't you have the Guild physical, Brandon? You lucky.
Oh yeah,
I have got that too.
actually,
Yes.
you can get the big version of it for relatively cheaply.
Yeah,
which has all of it.
I'm going to because back then, like that and
Oh.
Journey Quest would be sick to fucking run.
That reminds me, and I don't know. I may target us with some. I may put a target on this channel. I don't know, but I had honestly heard nothing. I think I've been going back and trying to get caught up on this channel, and I watched one where you guys were talking about like Gamergate or whatever, and I was like, I've never heard of this. I'm not a gamer, but I looked into it, and I saw that apparently people were of all people were threatening and targeting Felicia Day. I'm like, anyone who does that needs to be drug out in the street and shot. She is way too likable a person to say anything negative about.
Or at least briskly beaten about their face and head.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I've met her in person, and she was at Dragon Con. She was very sweet. And
Super
she it was a very sad. That whole thing was very sad because, and I didn't even see. I had a Twitter, but I wasn't really using it at the time that it was happening, and I wasn't really plugged into it. But like retrospectively, I look back on it, and it was such a bizarre situation because it was predicated on not really a whole lot that was actually real or concrete, and then it just kind of snowballed. And I think it was just one of those things where it was a lot of animosity that was building up within the gamer community that just kind of found an excuse to reach a fever pitch. And, and it was just one of those things that by the time it was over, people were like, what the fuck was that all about? That's why it's such a bizarre thing when you actually read it, because of how little was actually provable about the things that the Gamergaters were saying. That supposedly, Zoe Quinn was, having sex with whatever journalist to give her game a good review and all that. Like, it was just one of those things that you're like, that what a random thing to arise out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden it just becomes this massive thing.
Yeah,
and
that tends to be how the drama unfolds in the gaming community, unfortunately.
Well, and it was this thing where, like, and again, it was all these people that were seemingly unrelated that all of a sudden they connected the dots, in this particular way, because it was Zoe Quinn, it was Felicia Day, it was Anita Sarkeesian, it was these relatively disparate people that in and of themselves didn't have a whole lot to do with each other outside of them being involved in video games in some way and being female. And that was kind of all it was. And yet that seemingly was all that was needed, to allow the badness to happen. But still, it was such a bizarre thing. But I guess it, like you said, like there are certain things that they just, for whatever reason, there are these things that kind of boiled over. And then by the time it was over, everybody was like, what was that about? It was basically like a ginormous, like, temper tantrum that had real world consequences, because people were actively threatened and harassed and all that kind of stuff. And, the primary thing that I think that the Gamergaters were saying even was that they were just taking umbrage with someone that, or anyone that was, that was perceived to be an outsider kind of coming in to criticize video games or something, which, there was that video of Anita Sarkeesian that arose later on that kind of was like, where she was like, I didn't really know much about video games and I had to spend so much time getting into them. And, so they had some fair points on that level, but it didn't ever justify the harassment tactics or the, just the fact that it just blew up like it did.
That's unfortunately a byproduct of the internet and nerddom. you
Well, and
get some
also,
weird motherfuckers.
when did all this blow up?
I feel like that was like 3-4 years ago, was there?
It was 2014. It was 2014,
Yeah.
and it
Okay, so
it
like
was
6 years ago.
Quite some years ago.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
getting to be
yeah,
an
a long
old
time
Fucking
ago.
decade is basically 2016
Yeah.
till now has been a big fucking shit
Because
show.
I was gonna say that sounds really familiar to a lot of stuff that's going on now. You know, it's like,
Well, it
Yeah,
was
lot
it
of
was a
this stuff,
precursor to that sort of
Dane
stuff.
seems pretty familiar with it too. A lot of this stuff now
Mhm.
isn't that like unheard of for us if you follow gaming at all or that stuff. Like,
well, I'm just
it's
talking more
somehow
generally.
anything else now because of the current
It
climate.
started in it was funny even way before that. So part of what part of where this stuff kind of originates was like 4chan and different message boards and image boards and things, and even many years before all of that, like I want to say 2010 2011, I had friends who were this was in, shall we say, the salad days of internet culture as we know it today, and early days of social media, things like that, back when everything seemed all innocent and wonderful. But at that,
I'd roll the
but even
salad
at,
days back to like fucking, 05 through like 08. And then after that was like the peak of it. And then we've been downhill ever since.
we really have, but like I remember it even
people have gotten shittier for sure.
They have, but I remembered even back in those salad days that those friends that I was talking about, they framed it up this way. They said that the best things about the internet and the worst things come from 4chan, and it was very true. And well, and then of course once you hit like that kind of 2013 onward, once you hit that stride, then you saw kind of the poisoning of the well, shall we say? Because I think it was around that time that, well, specifically talking about video games, it was around that time that Anita Sarkeesian's Women versus Tropes in Video Games, that was around that time when that kind of first debuted on YouTube. And so you let that percolate for a bit, and then you let other aspects percolate for a bit, and then all of a sudden, just even the inkling of something going on with like a Zoe Quinn or whatever, and then it just boils over. And then unfortunately the fact that they were able to be successful with harassing and doxing and all that stuff, it kind of emboldened some of those groups to where then they mutated even further into like the people harassing the Ghostbusters cast and crew, and then the alt-right, and
They
then
did a fair amount to poke the bear though, but arguably it seemed like most of them hadn't been on the internet for very long at that time. Like, it's like, what are you doing, you fucking idiot? It's gonna make it worse.
Yeah, well, and that's really what it was. Is it just metastasized further and further? And
it was a dumpster fire there for like a couple of years at least, and it still is. It's just been a continuous smoldering dumpster fire for most of the time.
It has been. I mean, we had somewhat of a relief from it when we had the first wave of coronavirus hit us, and then once we had the George Floyd thing happen, then it's been a whole other wave of kind of back and forth talking. But like, well, I say talking very generously, but the difference there is that there does seem to be more of a matchup between what's being said and done and it translating into actual policy changes, which that's a change, because it's one thing to have your trendy movement hashtag. It's one thing to get into this fight in the online space or that fight, but it's another thing to have your raising awareness or whatever, having all of that turn into actual policy changes, and it seems like that's happening. And so that's a nice change of pace, because yeah, I don't, it's perfectly good to share ideas, but or even to raise awareness of things, but like if not a whole lot comes out of it, then or at least not right in the moment, then sometimes it can seem like, oh well, what was that about? Which I guess is kind of what Gamergate, like in and of itself, it just kind of happened and then it went away, but then the after effects just it mutated even further, but
Well,
it didn't result in anything good.
It's the same thing
know,
as the. Oh, go ahead.
Brandon.
I was just letting. I was just saying that there's a parallel between that and civil rights, and a lot of these movements. It's about power, and I mean, let me illustrate that a little bit. When you think about it, a lot of the anger comes from any group that has been privileged in a lot of a sense for so long. And at this point, gamers is a good example. Not every gamer, no, I'm not doing it, but a lot of this gaming had been targeting one specific demographic group for a long time. And there is a threat felt whenever another group tries to come into that group and widen the pool. When suddenly not every film has a white male lead. Whenever like you have this group, like a millionaire doesn't always reflect, oh well, they're not always an older white male. It's these types of things can be threatening to a lot of people when they look at that and they say, well, equal rights, that means it takes away my rights. It takes away, but there's no actual right.
Well, they see it as a zero sum game.
All these casual motherfuckers with movies that are like making waves about that stuff, or any hobby really. Like most of us that are the real OGs that have been here and seen movies over the years know that it's like, dude, movies is not like a one lane thing. We've seen stuff that empowers everyone our entire lives. Like we're watching all this shit. I mean, there's different stuff.
Well, and especially if we have verse, like you've said.
You know, it's those are the people that get
what you were saying there
shit all the time. You know, and it's like, well, that's not how the fucking movie.
Yeah, well, they're dumb if they. Yeah, they're dumb if they think that. Which I mean, what you were saying, Brandon, was that what you were saying
here, man.
What you were saying was that basically what they kind of see it as is a zero sum game, where in order for this group to have this level of exposure, then therefore it must take away something from my group in order for that to happen, as opposed to saying, well, the truth is that in the information age, in the age of being able to do it yourself, that, you know, if you want to make whatever kind of game or whatever kind of movie you want, then you know the options are available to you, as opposed to where in the old days there was a system you had to work through, and if you didn't fill or whatever, there wasn't a whole lot of options available. There weren't a whole lot of options available to you. But again, it's like, I think people, they don't really think in those kinds of historical terms, and whenever people don't think historically, then they do themselves a great disservice. You know, not the least of which is when you think about, like you said, with movies, you know, there were always movies that, well, not always, there for quite a long time, there were movies around that did empower, you know, women or minorities or whatever. Did they necessarily get as much exposure as?
I would never sit here and argue that there, you know, hasn't needed to be changes in that for a long time. Right? I just think it's like your average asshole that complains about stuff like that probably doesn't even watch movies.
Yeah.
You know, it's like your average dickhead now,
or they don't
about the Confederate flag and NASCAR probably doesn't even watch the goddamn races, you know? When have you ever been in the infield, asshole?
Yeah.
I doubt ever. Like fucking yeah, but you're on Facebook complaining about it.
Well, and they just, a lot of
my
people
favorite
just
thing is
want
people
to
that are
find
like,
a
horror
cause
movies should
to
be
latch
political.
onto.
And it's like, have you ever fucking watched a horror movie? Like half of them are political.
Yeah, like look back at like
Night of
the Living Dead, you know. Look back even at like something like, which is just technically sci-fi, but like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is all about the Red Scare, you know, and it just it's just, again, when we don't think about things historically, we do ourselves a great disservice because we don't have perspective, and a lot of people will just try to find a cause to latch onto without really thinking about it, and you know, that's another problem. I think there's It was something that, of all people, actually, I think Ben Shapiro actually put it very well, which was when he talked about how, in a lot of ways, there's a crisis of meaning in the current culture, and part of why people glob onto whatever social cause or whatever thing on social media is because you wake up in the morning and there are no other humans around. We're social creatures, and you get online and it's like, well, it's a crowd without a stated purpose. And so it's like, well, you're here, I'm here, you're here, we're all here, but it's this massive people without necessarily a reason behind it. And so therefore, when something even minute happens, then everybody kind of globs onto it. And I thought that was a very astute observation, because you see it all over the place.
Yeah.
Where something relatively minor can be blown up into this life or death thing because people clearly don't have a sense of understanding what real oppression or real issues or real, like historically, what exactly those constitute. Now, granted, you will have people like with the current movements to talk about racial justice and stuff. Generally speaking, the people that are leading those movements, they will be very historically well read, and so that's how you'd use that medium effectively. It's just when you don't have a long-term perspective historically, then that's when you do yourself a great disservice.
Right. I mean, in general, but back to the topic, like in terms of censorship of movies and things like that, people need to stop fucking letting their own things that they're offended by and historical bullshit affect art. That's stupid. Like you can't look at something that was made by a person as their piece of art and sit there and try to apply all your sensibilities to it. I mean, that's ridiculous. So when I brought it up in chat a while back, where it's like, if we were all based on the shit in our movie collections, people probably think we were fucking degenerates or something. With maybe the exception of Jake. Jake might be the only person here without some twisted shit on his fucking shelf.
I don't know.
You'd be wrong.
Well, I mean,
I'm sure he's got it just in different ways than us.
Look at my last two collection videos. Like, I got like Birth of a Nation in the one, and then the one I just posted, I got Triumph of the Will. And it's like, does that make?
I mean, it's just like most of the genres we screw with. Most of us, all of us, are horror fans, with the exception, I think, maybe of Jake also.
Well, but I got really fucked up cannibal films in my collection. I've got like movies that show animal.
We've got movies in our collection that dudes were literally arrested for making.
Seriously, I mean, it's like, what does that say about me? I mean,
nothing though. That should be the point, and it doesn't say anything about the guys that made it either. It's like, it's just fucking art for the sake of art. Like, they made it this offensive piece of material. Like, that's what they set out to do, and they did it. And it ruled.
I do think that what you have in your collection can say some things about you, but that does not mean that you are synonymous by any means. And people are complicated individuals. I think if you have an entirely predictable thing without a couple, like, what the hell, outliers, then that's kind of boring.
Yeah, I'd be more suspect of that guy, where it's like, what are you hiding, you fucking?
Well, that's exactly right. And I mean, honestly, like the perspective that I tend to come from, like, there was this story of a well, it was recounted by a YouTuber called Count Dracula, and it was I guess a real person. I don't know if he mentioned his name, but it was a Black man who had a closet full of KKK robes, and they're like,
Daryl Davis.
Yeah, well, but they were like,
called,
why?
What is it? Unintentional kindness or accidental kindness or something?
Something like that. Well, but it was about the fact that he has a closet full of KKK robes, and they're like, why do you, of all people, have a closet full of KKK robes? And it was like, every time that I get someone to, see the error of their ways and leave the clan, then they give me their robes. And it's like, that's he's like, honestly, like, that's the kind of person I want to be, where, like, if I were to have, a lot of KKK stuff, if I were to have a lot of, like, Nazi stuff or whatever, it would be so that way they would be out of the hands of people that would really get off on that kind of thing for the for their intended purposes. But it's like for me, it's like, well, I get them out of the hands of those people, get them into the hands of someone that exactly.
His whole ball game, and he's good at it. Like one of the most powerful. I saw that comment too, Brandon. One of those most powerful clips from that, though, is where he's like, this dude in full clan regalia is yelling at this crowd of white people, and he's like, I trust all you white N-words. Trust this man right here. And he points at Daryl, and then like they go inside and he slams the door.
I know Happiness. That was a messed up movie.
Yeah.
Good, though, dude. The guy fucking, and the thing that perplexed me the most is, how people are angered by his efforts to try to do that, and I get it, but it's just
for that matter, they might as well ban the Water Boy for that.
Mouth, Dave. You're gonna put it in their heads.
Ideas. Well, but I'm someone that I deliberately try to collect as many controversial movies as I can, because I'm always of the opinion that putting things like hiding things in a closet, not talking about them, that doesn't help anything. If anything,
it's weirder than just talking about it.
Well, if anything, it's severely counterproductive, because you're making it a problem, as opposed to saying, well, this is what went into this work, this is when it was made, this is why this happened this way. Like, it demystifies it, and it also, well, it teaches you something. It teaches you the history. It teaches you where we were versus where we are. And it's like, if you don't know that, then guess what? You don't know your history, and you're condemned to repeat the same things, because
historical movies that make like challenge you with ideas like that about like personal politics and those are good sometimes.
We should do
what about this makes me think about myself.
Do
you know what that movie Jesse's talking about there in the chat is, Brandon?
It's a 1998 Happiness.
Yeah.
I love Happiness. That's a great
I have
film.
seen it, but it's been a long
figured you would.
Oh yeah, it's a great film. Now the DVD, from what I understand, is very well. Basically, what it's about, it's a Todd Solondz film, and it's about three sisters who they have whatever kind of lives they have. One of them is seemingly happily married, except that her husband is secretly a child molester, or child rapist rather. And then one of the sisters, she is like a workaholic and doesn't have anybody. And then I think the third sister like wants to have someone but doesn't have someone in her life. And it's basically all the kind of cosmic ridiculousness of these people's existence, and how they struggle so hard to get what they want, only for life to basically just slam the door in their faces. And it's a very it's an incredibly depressing film, and yet it's also it's also quite funny in a kind of really sick way, because because you see these people struggling to get what they want so badly, and the fact that they don't get it, and their lives just kind of crumble around them. Like, for whatever reason, there's just something, the way that it's done, like, especially when it becomes clear to the family, like, exactly who, like, for what, like, the boy, the dad's son, when it becomes very clear what their dad is and what he does, that scene, it's equal parts disturbing and heartbreaking, but there's also just something, for whatever reason, it's just something with how the lines are delivered, but there's just something so morbidly funny about it. And it's like I can't really, I can't explain it. You just have to see it. But it's like the way that it's done, it's like the kid's reaction. It's like the kid's reaction is just like, if you were in that situation in real life, it'd be horrible. But like watching it back, you're just like, this is so, I don't know. It's just so funny because it's so,
so for it to not
from what I
comfortable.
recall of this film, it reminded me a lot of something. It's kind of in the same vein as a film by Noah Baumbach or Terry Swigoff, but probably a little bit less enjoyable.
Yeah, well, those are actually good comparisons, and I adored the Noah Baumbach films I've seen so far, which are The Squid and the Whale and the Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected. I adored those films. And then Terry Zwigoff, I loved Crumb, which was a documentary, but still. I adored that film, and then I adored Ghost World, and I adored Bad Santa. Like it's like that's a good indication of my sense of humor. Like they're very, very dark films, very messed up.
His darkest one I've seen was Art School Confidential, and I would say
I love Art School
Confidential. Part of that.
I need to see that.
Screenshotting your chat right now, Jesse Ballinger. For
let's see. Hoffman's worst and best performance too.
Which one?
It was an interesting performance. Yeah,
I'm probably
he fits into those kind of movies like a good glove. I mean, it's like hi,
hey, Michael McNally back up in the house.
Yeah. But yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman, that was a great loss to film.
Oh yeah, he was really good in Happiness. Like he played a really messed up character in there.
New York or whatever. That was a weird one. I remember watching Schenectady, New York.
I still need to see that myself, actually.
I don't know if to see that too.
Like kind of left me because I smoked a bunch of weed, right? And then I watched Schenectady, New York.
Wasn't that one written and directed by Charlie Kaufman? Am I remembering that?
Yes, it was.
I fucking just had like a bad day the rest of the day.
Kaufman wrote some of the best head trip movies ever made. I mean, he really did. And I believe I did see one he directed. And it was pretty bleak and depressing. And that was that animated film Anomalisa. That one was very strange and very.
It just kind of left me with this like feeling for the rest of the day, which is, honestly, I'm not knocking. Like, I love when a movie can leave you with that fucking feeling for the day, you know? Like, that's how powerful a film can be right there, where it's almost like
I never looked at this. I didn't realize he wrote for a whole bunch of TV shows, including Dana Carvey's show, and
that's interesting.
Wow. And he did the story for an episode of Moral Oral.
I love Moral Oral. That shit was amazing.
I adore being John Malkovich in Adaptation.
What's up, what do you got going on?
I was just saying, with what y'all saying again, it's all about feeling what they want you to feel.
Yes,
in a way that is effective. A good movie that I know is one of Jacob's favorite Oscar-winning films, Affliction.
Oh, I love it now.
He loves that one so much, and to me, it is one of my favorites. I really do enjoy it. Let me rephrase that. That's such a bad way of saying it. But it's such a dark reflection of reality.
It's extraordinarily well done.
And it does exactly what it is out to do. It has you feeling the way that you're supposed to feel.
Yes.
As opposed to like something like, say, American Beauty that also does the same thing well. But again, it's about, can we respect a film for what it can do for us, but still not like the film? At the same time. Like, say, me and American Beauty. I still hate that film.
I love it.
The passion.
Well,
I love American Beauty.
Are you kidding? I love American Beauty. But I like
anybody liking it. I just hate it.
I like films that. I like films that they can put you in a space that is possibly uncomfortable and is different than your normal world.
Dane, we need to probably talk more about other types of movies sometime. I love that. Like, I always tell people all the time, a movie's, it's like a painting. A painting's not always supposed to make you feel happy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
You know, sometimes a movie feel like you need to take a fucking shower after you watched it, and I enjoy that. You can't something where it's like splattery or gory or over the top. Like I love that
Yeah.
rush
Well, you
in
can't.
the movie that puts me
Well,
out of my.
that's a good example of like I know a lot of you guys who really like the splatter stuff and whatever. A lot of people really like the visceral feel that those movies make you feel. I don't. I don't enjoy
Even if
nausea.
you don't, you
I
can
don't
maybe
enjoy it.
understand
One-
the twisted side
Right.
of that. where it's like something
I
like
don't-
American Beauty
I just
like that.
viscerally don't enjoy that feeling. So that's
No,
why
I
I can't get into those films the way some people can. But like,
it's like skateboarding,
Yeah.
man. You know, some of us like to skate vert, some of us like to skate street,
Yourself,
some of us like to
Right.
plow right down the fucking hill into a goddamn, 18-wheeler or something.
But on
It's
the
just
other
it
hand,
depends on how you want to fucking do it.
on the other hand, though, if the point of the film is to creep you the hell out, and it does
Yeah.
it well, I don't really like that feeling either. But I take it better, and I do enjoy a film that succeeds at that task. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
Right.
I like
Exactly.
films,
That's what I was
honestly.
getting at. You know,
My
like
favorite-
honestly, splatter movies, I'm
waiting
desensitized to that stuff.
I'm waiting for that film that'll just make me turn it off and be like, "The fuck was that?"
Yeah, I love.
I've not seen a movie like that. I mean, part of it is that for me, like the kind of
I did
movies
walk out
tend
of the
to.
I did walk out of the room 5 minutes into disaster movie, but
Well, the kinds of movies I tend to like to like, as far as like I like it when movies can put you in the uncanny space of wherever the
Mhm.
artist's head was at, whatever feeling that is, happy, sad, whatever. My favorites are, generally speaking, as far as that goes, my favorites are generally the ones that make you feel uncomfortable or make you feel something that you've never really felt before. And especially like when it deals with something that is so strange that it can only be true, like something like Tiger King or like Pain and
Right.
Gain, something that's based on a story that is so bizarre
Right.
that it can't help but be true. Or like in the case of something like Happiness, or even
Right.
like No Country for Old Men, something that's
Lord.
kind of, something that's kind of about putting the audience in a place of either hopelessness or feeling like the traditional notions of good and evil don't apply, or justice and injustice don't apply, or especially like Sallow, like that's a film that it'll put you in that space of feeling like there is no hope, there's no nothing for people that are suffering. It puts you in that
Or just
it
like
puts you in that space.
puts you out of your
I
comfort
think
zone,
it's
man.
important. I think it's important to be in those places, because once you've once you've been there in a way that is safe, because you yourself didn't have to go through the experience, you've gone through it in a safe way, and so therefore you go back to your own life and you're like, my life's not so bad. And I think there's a tremendous value to that. I mean, I have learned so much from that, where I'll be walking in the shoes of someone far less fortunate than me, or in a situation that seems to be so hopeless or so like cosmically insignificant in some way, that it makes me reevaluate my own life. And I think that's great, but I think a lot of people, they're too afraid to do that.
I mean, it's like, I'll make this quick because I know that we're running long here or something.
Yeah.
Basically, for me, splatter movies and that shit's been my life for so long that stuff doesn't really bother me anymore. You know what I mean? Like I can watch some necromantic love fucking story all day long, but like American Beauty, that's a little more rooted in reality, that bothers me more than like a splatter movie.
Yeah,
like
it depends on how it's done, as always. Like Cannibal Holocaust versus like another. Cannibal Holocaust versus another kind of movie, like Cannibal Holocaust is
or something. I'd rather watch Cannibal Holocaust a million than watch Requiem for a Dream again. That movie's rough.
Well, yeah, the
Well,
Requiem.
but even
man.
something like Cannibal Holocaust, like even that tries to ground itself more in reality than something like, say, Friday the 13th, which is about as make believe as you can get in terms of like a slasher film and stuff. That's part of why people like
Slightly
it. But like,
different kind of
I
film.
tend, well, but you know what I mean. It's like you take something that's violent and has a lot of gore and stuff, but it like Cannibal Holocaust, yeah, it's exploitive, but it's done in a way that attempts to ground itself more in reality than something else might. Versus like Friday the 13th, which is just meant to be fun, escapist, kind of make believe. But like I think again, it depends on how it's done. I love, you know, a silly, super gory film like a Poultrygeist. You know, I love that as much as the next guy. I think generally speaking, the movies that generally speaking, the violent movies that I tend to gravitate to the most are the ones that use it for a very specific intended effect to kind of make you think, like, even if it's not all that intense, something like a Clockwork Orange or Apocalypto or you know, well, any Mel Gibson. Yeah, any Mel Gibson film, I think, uses violence to incredible effect. And you know, so like those are the kinds of films I tend to gravitate to the most in terms of violence. Usually it's just something that goes kind of beyond your typical kind of escapist violence, even though that too has its place.
Well,
because like there's a certain point at which it gets so intense that it becomes funny. And that's why you get so many things like Poultrygeist that are so gory, so ridiculous that it can't help it be,
because it's a musical.
yeah, but it's like it can't help but be funny because it is so over the top versus, you know.
So I did want to wrap this back around to the beginning again, as we need to start wrapping up. But I did want to say that one thing that actually pushes us all together as a group is the form of media itself as art, and that art speaks to all of us in different ways, and that's good. There is no wrong way. I mean, yeah, some art experts and so on will say that there's a wrong way, but screw them. But you know, there is no wrong way to look at or appreciate media. There are, you know, without that variety, without that idea of universal appeal, there are people out there who love something like, say, Bunny the Killer Thing, or something like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, or
Pieces.
People, exactly. That's the thing. It's all relative. There are people who love Woody Allen films. There are people who hate Woody Allen films.
And I had someone, when I watched this, someone had the temerity to say The Gamers was one of the worst movies they ever saw. I'm like, no, it was awesome.
But you see, and that's the thing. That's the thing. It's all about experiences, all about feelings, and it's awesome. It's awesome that you love American Beauty, and for me, it's awesome that I hate it.
Yeah,
and
that's the beauty of it.
That's why we collect. That's why
it's all about sharing. It's all about it's all about sharing your perspective in a way that you know, even if you like something, if you don't like something, what matters is like how well you can explain your reasoning, and you know that you make your perspective clear, and generally that it, you know, is rooted in something that, you know, another person can appreciate even if they don't agree. Like that's generally how you can separate, you know, an actual opinion versus just a knee-jerk reaction.
Yep.
Well, I know like we talked about Noah Baumbach. I know Brandon and I sharply differ on our opinions of Marriage Story. I think we both thought it was a good film, but I enjoyed it, and that was not...
I enjoyed it for what it was.
Yes,
it's sort of like with American Beauty. I appreciate what it is.
Yeah,
I just don't like it.
Well, like just for an example of some things, like, and I know you said several times, Brandon, your cardinal sin is boredom.
Oh heck yeah!
There is a film that I have that I am proud to have, that I'm thrilled to have in my collection, that I genuinely believe was robbed of an Oscar nomination, and that was the Rinko Kikuchi star Kumiko the Treasure Hunter. And it's about a woman who has lost all interest in life. It's boring. It's devoid of interest until she discovers a VHS in a cave of Fargo and then goes to Minnesota looking for the money. And it's loosely based on an urban legend. It's just an awesome movie. But the first half of the film is pretty tedious and boring. But it's putting you in her headspace. And she does a phenomenal job with the role. But that's one where you have to have a little bit of an appreciation for what the filmmakers were going for. Because,
Yeah, but I don't think the people who made art.
Generally speaking, I think that's a good.
Boring, because
generally speaking,
sometimes you got to have like a boring part of a movie,
right?
Build up.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, it's a good rule of thumb for
and I think
for
a lot
criticism.
Of people that write stuff is boring. Probably aren't.
Or another good example is the films that you really can't say you get enjoyment out of. Like I can think of 3 disparate films that I have that were absolutely shattering films to watch. 4 if you count Requiem for a Dream. But that put me in mind of the Australian drama Candy, which was along much of the same thing. And then you got the Japanese film Nobody Knows and the Kurdish film Turtles Can Fly. All 3 of these are films, but they're really, really good at showing you a particular something you might never have thought about otherwise.
People are too close-minded on what they think movies should be. Like, sometimes a movie's meant to make you feel fucking exhausted by the time that you're done. Sometimes the movie's meant to make you feel
generally speaking,
gross. That's it's art.
And generally speaking, a good rule of thumb
way all the time, and it's weird when people. Like, even in horror groups, I see it all the time where it's like something like Hereditary or Midsommar gets ripped apart by your average people.
I like
because I just want people getting killed and like dumb shit. And it's like, well, there's a billion of those movies. Like, why did you watch this one then?
A bunch of people get killed in Midsommar.
What is the most boring?
I had a stoop alone that's fucking worth watching the movie for.
I was gonna say, Dave,
generally speaking, a good rule of thumb for criticism. Generally speaking, a rule of thumb is to assess what the filmmaker was trying to do and whether or not that succeeded. They succeeded at that, and whether or not you like it is another matter. But I mean, that's always a good place to start: is figure out what was their goal with making this, and did they achieve it. That's generally how I try to approach things. And then of course it comes down to, well, is it for me or not? Because that's where the subjectivity comes into play. But if they achieve their goal, then in and of itself, you have to say, well, they achieved their goal, so therefore relative to what they were trying to do, it's successful.
Dave,
I think a good rule of thumb is like, you're not fucking Siskel and Ebert. So don't sit there thinking that your review of something should determine whether or not somebody sees it. Like, I think that's the worst offense that a lot of people make. I will warn you about a shit movie. I've done it a couple of times recently on my channel, and that's after much deliberation, though, bro. Like, I'm not just going in there like I didn't like this, so I'm gonna say it's shit. It has to be pretty shit before I'm gonna warn people about it. But just in general, like
what I hate is like
that their tastes should dictate other people's tastes, and I see that a lot in horror groups and gaming groups and just any hobby groups.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, who the fuck are you, man?
And
You're
as
just
much
another
as
asshole in a basement.
as much as Siskel and Ebert, as much as they kind of set the standard for what we think of as film criticism today, as much as they did that, and as much as they came at it from a place of, well, obviously having a very rich film repertoire, not just being Joe's off the street or whatever. As much as they did that, they did tend to inadvertently generate the idea in people's minds that your subjective experience with the movie should be held up as, kind of this all-encompassing judgment on the film's quality or whether or not you would like it or whatever, and those two things are not the same. You have to be able to separate how a film did or didn't work for you versus how it may or may not work for someone else,
Yeah, it's
because
super weird.
there's a
to me that
reason
people
why,
that
like,
still
as much
base
as
their- Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know we
that
could go
was as much as like they hated. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know we could go on about these subjects all night as it is, but I did want to start wrapping up. And
No, sorry, bud.
and Dave, I know you've been trying to make a point for a while, and then I haven't been there. So I wanted to give you the final word before we do our wrap ups.
Okay.
I do hate to interrupt.
Sorry, I got
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sure I cut you off at some point too. My bad, buddy.
That's okay. I completely forgot what I was going to say. So, but I what were we saying? For what was the last thing that someone was saying?
Critiquing, I guess, and kind of.
As far
well, kind of the objectivity versus subjectivity.
Brandon, what is the most boring movie that you have come across?
Ooh.
Artifacts.
Yeah. It's a
Right.
joke.
Boring movie for you, Jake. What was the most boring movie you've ever
Oh,
seen?
man. Well, like I said, it's a running joke for us that was Artifacts, but I honestly, it might be that one. I can't think of very many. I know the first time I watched Gone with the Wind, I was bored to tears by the first half. But then eventually I got over it. But I'm trying to think of, probably Artifacts.
How about you, Mo? What was the most
The
boring
English
movie?
Patient.
English.
Oh, I love the English Patient.
See, I feel like I would probably dig it now if I went back and watched it, but at the time, and it could be because part of me was a little kid, but I remember being like sprawled out, like, this is the worst
That's not
thing
a little kid movie.
in the summer heat, and you're making us watch English Patient. We watched it outside of all things. Like, I don't know why I thought that was cool
Right.
to put on in the backyard
Hey.
party, but it was like,
The
what?
most boring movie you have ever seen?
Well, the one that leaps to mind right now, just because we watched it relatively recently, was American Mummy. Like, that was pretty boring.
Which
But
one?
then, like, I don't know if that would be like the most boring though, because like I'm really trying to think, because like there have been movies that, more so when I was younger, but like there have been a few movies that I've fallen asleep to, but like. I'm really trying to think if I can think of one that was like the top tier one. I mean,
used to
I
watch
think American Mummy was pretty boring.
Rob Roy, when I was a kid, I was like, I just want to punch this guy in the fucking
I
face.
actually kind of like Rob
But,
Boy.
like, I do love Rob Roy, like, as I've revisited it over the years because of him. Ironically, like, I went back and watched a bunch of Stepdad movies, and I was like, these are actually pretty good. At the time, I was like, I want to watch Yu-Gi-Oh, you piece of shit.
You just remind me though, because I've been going through a few years now, getting a lot of narcoleptic feeling. Sometimes I do fall asleep during exciting movies. But when I worked at the theater, I was heavily narcoleptic, and there were 2 or 3 I went to see that were so boring. And one of them was that Liam Neeson film, Run All Night. Oh my God, that was boring. And then The Gunman with Sean Penn was so boring. That was
Yeah, I didn't hear good things about that.
None of us really have fucking memories of, you know what I mean?
Well, actually, so there was a movie that I saw with my mom, or I attempted to see with my mom in the theater, and it was called. I would probably like it if I saw it now, if I like finished it, but at the time. It was called Of Gods and Men, and it was a
yeah.
movie about some Catholic priests that were held up in a castle or something, and it was supposed to be very critically acclaimed. I remember she and I both were pretty bored by it, and then we were like, "This is boring," and we actually left. Now, I wouldn't mind seeing it.
Dude, when I was a kid,
Go ahead.
my dad took me to see White Fang, and I fell asleep in the movie theater. Okay. And then I went to see my last movie with my dad when I was 19 years old. I forget what it was now, but I do remember, like, still to that day, the joke lived where it was like, "Are you going to fall asleep during this?" Or, like, he never let me live it down from White Fang in 1991, you know? It's like, dude, we're going to see Men in Black 3. You're still asking me if I'm going to... It was some shit like that, you know?
Oh, that's a fun movie.
My mom, like, I would always see movies with her, and if it was something that she wasn't overly interested in, like, I remembered it was the first Madagascar, which I remembered at the time I really wasn't I was not blown away by it. I have not seen it since then, but I saw it in the theater, and I was like 13. I was like, I don't really, but like she had bought a Chick-fil-A sandwich or whatever, and she had snuck it in and was eating it. And I guess she had gone into a food coma or something because she fell asleep during the movie. But yeah, she actually fell during a couple movies in the theater.
Good times.
Dude, me and we used to take like sleeping bags because we'd always go with like our nieces and nephews, and they'd get tired and need like a nap halfway through a movie. So we were like a drive-in white trash family, I guess. So we'd roll up in there with like sleeping bags, watch Dungeons and Dragons in the theater. And I remember halfway through that movie, I was like, "Yeah, I'm taking one of these bags." And
I was so excited for that movie. It was
so fuck. I was hyped, dude. I was hyped on the Dungeons and Dragons movie.
My gaming days.
It was okay. Okay, I did eventually see the second half of the movie that I slept through on DVD, and it was like, it was okay. It's not what we deserved, but you know.
Well, so we'll go ahead and start wrapping up then. And I will start with Dave, if you'll tell us a little bit about your channel and what you do.
Sure. My name is David Straight. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, which many of you attend, where we go on and talk about anything that you pretty much desire. And I think we've had fun. With being able to vote and have it be fair, and I think we have fun while we're discussing.
Yeah, it's a better part of my week for sure.
It's always fun.
I think we will tomorrow with Dan's movies.
I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I go on about different videos. Some are reviews. Some are video pickups of the films that I pick up, and I enjoy sharing my knowledge and my thoughts on some films that are current, present, and in the past. So definitely check some of those out. I just recently did some science fiction films, so definitely check those reviews out, and a Bigfoot review. So.
And Dave, it's your choices next week, isn't it?
Yeah, his birthday choices. His Caveman and the Aronofsky double feature. Encino Man.
Noah. That's what the other one was.
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
Two very similar films.
Very similar.
So, Dane, tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel.
Well, sorry to have. I feel like I was like going all over the place and rambling and going nuts. So sorry about that. But
that's the purpose
anyway,
of these conversations.
well, I just Sometimes I just get carried away. What can I say?
That's
But
why
I
we're
am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, and I have a channel. It's in indie horror film creative where I'm on with a bunch of other good people, and I was what was I doing? I was just did an unboxing video today, just trying to catch people up on where I'd been. Trying to bring people into my process for getting my Blu-ray collection back up. And I did a big collection unboxing today, including the notorious Triumph of the Will on Blu-ray, because, well, when we were talking about, censorship and everything, I was like, I better snag this up before
Oh,
it magically goes
They
out
had
of
that on
print or I
Blu-ray?
can't find it anymore or whatever.
who
Yeah, they
put it
do.
on Blu-ray?
Now I had to order it. I had to order it from Synapse Films directly because I could not find it on Blu-ray on eBay or Amazon, and so I was like, I gotta snag this before it becomes too late. And in the video, I talked about how it is Nazi propaganda. It is notorious for that reason. It's important to watch for historical reasons and for just learning about filmmaking because it is a stunning film to look at visually. It's a clearly influenced so many people across the board, but and I like to talk about things that most people are too afraid to talk about these days. Not exclusively, but I am not afraid to, I should say. But yeah, doing that, trying to get my own filmmaking efforts back on track, and just trying to be. Well, I'm thankful that I have a stable life again. That's a good thing.
Oh yeah, and it's fun looking at your insights. We were talking about the purpose of collecting, and you usually are very good at articulating the importance of each of those pieces in your collection.
Oh yeah, well, and especially if it's something like Triumph of the Will or like Birth of a Nation, which I unboxed last time. Which the common instinct these days is to just act like those films never existed, but I'm someone like, no, they existed, and this is way to talk about them, because if we don't, then we're just watching away history, and you got to talk about the unpleasant parts of history, especially because if you don't, then you're condemned to repeat it. So that's why I like to be brave enough to do that, because a lot of people are not brave enough to do that these days.
All right. So Mo, tell us a little bit about your channel. Yeah.
Okay, well, we do a fair amount of DVD reviews over there. Drunken Master Studios recently did one for Ginger Snaps, I think it was. On Transfusion. So get over there and check those out. I just pretty much fuck around and do videos when it strikes me, and I'm trying to get a lot more regular about it. We'll see how that goes, but got a lot of stuff going on over there. So we also did a discussion for the Funhouse by Toby Hooper, which Brandon seemed to enjoy.
Oh, I had to get back into it. I had to watch that, and then Dark Ride, and then Hellfest back to back.
Fuck yeah. And that's what it's all about, man. So, at the end of the day, outside of checking out my channel, I would say just share movies with your friends. Help them find new stuff that they haven't seen and all that shit. That's what it's about. That's why I love hanging out with these guys so much, is because they make me watch movies that I probably wouldn't fuck with otherwise, And if you don't have friends that are doing that for you, you need to diversify your friendships. You don't want to live in an echo chamber where it's just the same horror movies getting recommended to you all the time. You need guys like Brandon and Jake and Dane and your fucking crew, so that you can watch movies that you aren't just watching normally while you're being a dirtbag in your fucking basement. So
I will admit, I would not have been Darkness, the vampire version otherwise.
Well, and I would hope that
you hit their head with Echo Chamber there, because those are so
good.
Oh, or like the creme de la creme of the last month or so.
Yes. Shoot, video violence. Video violence was freaking awesome as well. So
thank you, sir.
And one day, my copy will get out of Germany once the COVID stuff lifts, and
One And as you said earlier, you may finally get your Elephant Man copy just in time for the Criterion release.
I would
Exactly.
hope one day we might do
Thank God that they finally put that out.
Yes, and
just
I just may do that.
video
There was-
violence or darkness. You know, like I think we could do a movie and splice it together and make it look like we're all in the right place at the right time. You know, and I think we could do it.
So I even have my own samurai sword. You see.
You could do some real violence with that.
Yeah, but you guys want to see that shit pop over there? Check it out. My dogs are going crazy. I'm gonna mute my mic, but yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
So Jake, are you doing anything lately, independent of the channel?
Work.
Well, that is what we all have to do. That is for sure.
Yes.
Well-
so much. So
Yep.
much.
One thing that SeptumSin versus the world does do is we are a channel dedicated to the hopeful eventual crossover of Evil Bong and Beverly Hills Chihuahua.
I know I'm hoping for it.
We have been on a non-stop campaign for the last couple of years talking about nothing else but Beverly Hills Chihuahua and Evil Bong. It's been such an awesome ride as we've gone. Jake here, who is a huge fan of the Beverly Hills Chihuahua franchise, and of course,
Well, you gotta do Bong of the Living Dead versus Evil Bong, right?
I'm still waiting for High School Musical 4 Jason Goes to Town. You know, nice little horror
Oh,
movie.
hell yeah.
But, we have fun here on
That'd
this
be
channel.
awesome.
And of course, I joke because we this is the channel. Most of you who are watching it probably know of this channel because you're watching us on here.
Yes.
But I wanted to thank, but I don't really care as much about talking about my own channel because you're here. I want to share the people who have come with us and give us such great insights. Without them, we wouldn't have as interesting a conversation. So I thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. And though we could have talked for much longer,
And our unofficial guest, too.
yes, I just, and that's the thing. I love the conversation. For a conversation to get wound up and flowing like that tells me it's a good conversation and one worth having.
Indeed.
So,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much, and I wish you all a good night.
Right?